Hey, welcome to another episode. I'm Brian Roycentul, your host, and today I'm super excited to have Marc Washington here with me, founder and CEO of Supergut, a leading health nutrition brand. Marc's brand focuses on boosting digestion and supporting healthy appetite control. And in the past year, they have achieved impressive growth, and we're going to discuss that in a minute. Uh, Quadrupling revenue and breaking into the physical retail space after building a solid DTC foundation. We'll dive into the entrepreneurial journey, the challenges they have faced, and how they continue to stand out in a competitive market with their science backed, ethically focused products. Hey, Marc, thanks for being on the show.
No, nice intro. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Great to be here.
Yeah, well, you deserve it. So, after all, it's your story. So, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself if you have, of course, anything to add on your background and how you came up with the idea of creating Supergut.
Yeah, absolutely. So, background, I've been in the space of health and wellness throughout my career, but up until now, I've been the right hand to the executive, to the entrepreneur, right? And I helped scale other health and wellness businesses and food and beverage and supplements and fitness, and I love it. And I thought that was my path, but there was always an itch, right? That entrepreneurial itch, which had been building. I was like, at some point, I'm going to scratch that itch. And I was like, I learned a lot from very successful entrepreneurs, like in this space, how to help people live healthier lives, how to scale businesses. But at the same time, I always felt like there were some elements that things that I would do differently, right? If I were to actually launch a business. And one of the things was much more of an impact orientation. Which is something that really drove me to start a business. And it's something that has always been inside me. But I'd say what brought it to the forefront was actually is a personal story that I do share and speak openly about. It actually was related to my sister. Her name is Monica, and she struggled with her health throughout her adult life. So she lived with diabetes and obesity and hypertension, and she tragically passed away far too young. And that was something that really was a tragic, and it struck me deeply. And it was just a fire that built in me over time that this shouldn't have happened. And part of I think helped me connect with my why, and why I'm here is to help other people, like, and honor my sister's legacy with more impactful functional lifestyle. And like, let's try to do that through food and nutrition. And so that for me was the final thing that got me out of the executive chair and into the fire, right into the arena of this crazy entrepreneurial world.
Yeah, that's a powerful story. Thank you for sharing that, by the way.
Yeah, of
So,
course.
so when did you start the company? What year was this?
Yeah, it was about 5 years ago, back in 2019.
So
Yeah.
we can say, there's a point like COVID marked like and before and after. So it was pre-COVID.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. Well, barely pre-COVID, right? I mean, remember, like, when things started building up, like we were in an office because I always wanted to have my team together. It was a small team. It was like four of us at the time. That we had a co-working space and we were working on stuff together. Then all of a sudden, we're like, this thing is happening, right? And then as soon as it came down, we all like scattered, right? Like cockroaches when the light comes on to our other locations. And we launched the company. We launched the brand, I should say, in the midst of COVID. Like, and so we started out direct to consumer. Fortunately, given that it was a nutrition product, we had manufacturing partners that could stay in business. And so, yeah, we launched, you started pre COVID, we launched the brand in the midst of COVID, and now we're obviously operating post COVID.
Wow, that must have been tough. It
Yeah.
was I mean, looking back, it was like the golden era or the most recent golden era of e-commerce, I would say, the COVID years. But
Mhm.
I'm not sure if you were launching or about to launch the brand right before COVID with a certain context and rules,
Yeah.
and then COVID hits, and boom, you don't have the team in house anymore or in the office
Yes.
anymore. You need to make sure that supply chain still works for you. So
Yeah, that last part was one of the hardest pieces, was actually supply chain, because we were able to figure out, as most people have, how to get things done in a remote environment, right? I mean, I prefer in person as much as possible. We figured that part out, but having a supply chain and a distributed supply chain and ingredients sourced from different locations, it was an absolute mess during COVID. So it was definitely a major challenge.
yeah, but Well, you have done a great job because based on what I know, and correct me if I'm wrong at any point, you have exponentially grown in, I mean, the revenue of the business in the last year. So I'm very curious, and I'm sure the audience is too, about what you did or which factors influenced that growth.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I'll just say is, yes, we definitely have found sort of figured ourselves out and the right value proposition that really resonates with consumers, and that's allowed us to really scale, in particular over the past year. I will say transparently, it's not as though this thing has been up and to the right sort of every year since I started, and then it growth and growth and growth. It's very much been kind of ups and downs, the more traditional entrepreneurial path, right? And it's not traditionally going to be always bright and sunny and up and to the right. So we haven't been an exponential growth from the very outset. We've seen flashes here and there, but not something that would allow what I call escape velocity. And we finally are there. And for us, I think one of the keys is we have always had this foundation in functional, science-based, but still enjoyable products, right? That was the foundation when kind of the ethos of the company and where we really started doing a lot of research and making sure that our products actually delivered on the promise and they were actually functional, good for your gut health, but good for overall health, metabolism, blood sugar, appetite control. What would take us a bit to evolve was on the branding and the value proposition, right? How do we express that in a way that's going to resonate with the consumer, that's going to solve a problem that is top of mind for them? And that's where we iterated on kind of over time and we tweaked. We actually rebranded the company a couple years ago to Supergut. So Supergut as a brand is only about 2 years old. So we rebranded and we also have tweaked and played with our value proposition. Like at first we started on a real more of a significant health issues like focused on like blood sugar control and obesity, like literally mostly targeted at people who are really struggling, frankly, very much like my sister. And then when we rebranded to Supergut, we're like, well, let's see if we can actually be more preventative in nature, right? From a brand and from a value proposition to help people try to stay on a healthier wellness path. And leaning more into the gut health dimension. And it's really been this third era that I talk about where we've kind of combined those two together. Whereas now we consider ourselves the gut healthy approach for healthy metabolism and appetite control. And one of the things we talk about a lot is we help your body naturally create some of these hormones that'll keep you satisfied and satiated. One of them is called GLP-1, which now is very popular because of all the breakthrough weight loss drugs like Ozempic, Mounjaro, etc. The reality is they're mimicking something that your body's naturally meant to do when it's fed the right things. And those things are the prebiotics, like what we have in Supergut, and that happens in your gut that actually helps you naturally create some of those appetite suppressing hormones like GLP-1. And so that's when we tweaked and iterated on that. And it's helped us communicate the same base foundation of products, but communicating a value proposition in a way that resonates with consumers and helps them connect the dots to, oh, okay, so now I understand why you're talking about gut health because it's connected to this thing that can help me maintain healthy weight or maybe even lose weight. Like now I'm in, right? And so that's really getting that right, getting the branding right, and the value propositions really is what's allowed us to introduce Supergut and introduce our really functional, great tasting products to a lot more people, and has kind of help us scale.
That's cool. And I guess it was, I don't know, was it easy to, you know, communicate those values because it's so technical that you need to,
Yeah.
simplify the message for the audience. So did you
Yes.
find that
Mhm.
process easier than you expected or harder?
Harder. Yeah, no, I would say the answer is gonna be harder to pretty much anything that relative to expectations. But yeah, it's one of those things where I knew this going into it, that you need to communicate in a way that is received, right? That resonates and keeping things simple. That's kind of something I've come from consumer. I've seen it. But I will say that at the first era of this company, the science was so profound and so fascinating that I'd say I and we as a company fell a little bit too in love with the science, right? And to some of the technical. And I think we overdid it in terms of how much we wanted to express that and educate. I still think those foundational tenets are part of this company and this brand, but I think we've definitely oriented it in a way where it's not just hitting you over the head with a lot of technical, where you have to feel like you have a
Yeah.
PhD, right? In order to understand what we're talking about in a way that a average consumer can understand. Is one of the big changes that we've had to tweak and iterate, both reorient myself as well as my team and our brand in a way that we're still providing some helpful information and some education, but I like to say it's edutainment, right, from a content standpoint. So we might do things in a fun way that, in bite-sized pieces. And then we're there for anybody that wants to go deeper. You can go to our site, you can go to our blog, you can double click and you can get into some real technical gut microbiome, short chain fatty acids, butyrate, and GLP-1 and GIP. Like, we can go very, very deep for anybody that wants to. But I will say that that's not most people, right? Most people are like, does it taste good? What's it going to do for me? I'm
Yeah,
good. How much
exactly.
does it cost? Right?
So, in a few minutes, I will ask you about, what you said by the end, entertaining through the message, educating, etc. But before doing that, I wanted to ask you about the what we discussed about, growing the revenue by,
Mhm.
changing the messaging, rebranding, etc. How did you come up with that new messaging that was, or this new audience as well? And again, correct me if I'm wrong at any
Right.
point, from only people who has this condition or this disease, I don't know what to call it, and my apologies in advance. But and
Yeah. Yeah. That's
uh,
okay.
versus, preventing these as well. Did you survey them? Did you analyze, I don't know, post-purchase surveys or focus groups? How did you do it?
Yeah, no, it was the answer is a little bit of all of the above. And I'd say the overarching theme, and it's something that I've learned as an entrepreneur, and it had to be a learned experience because I was coming from more of an executive standpoint, is as an entrepreneur, early stage startup, the criticality of iteration and speed are critical as a business, because you're not going to get everything right, but if you're slow, you're going to get it wrong, right? You're sure to get it wrong. And so that's been one of the lessons learned as an entrepreneur, is that you can't kind of dig in and analyze things left and right. I was not only a executive, I was a management consultant, right? And so came from the world where you can't be wrong, right? You have to analyze and get tons of research and look at things from 10 different ways. Nobody got time for that as an entrepreneur. You need to, obviously take the information that you can, but you need to decide, right? And you need to test and learn. And if it works, lean in. And if it doesn't, you step back, take in more information, you tweak, and you try it again, right? And so this concept of like A/B testing is like not just a website thing. It's like a business strategy thing. It's a value proposition thing. It's a messaging thing. And that's basically the approach that we took. And
Yeah.
so, yes, we definitely did some consumer research and surveys. And oh, you're showing me a book.
Yeah.
What is that?
This is a book called The Lean Startup. For those listening to this, I'm showing the cover of this book I have right here. It's by Eric Rice. I got it in 2011, or it's kind of an old book now. But the principle is, being lean as a startup founder, as a startup, as a whole, and doing exactly this, iterating and iterating, and not just having this analysis paralysis. And then when you want to to implement what you analyzed, that's old by then. That analysis is no
Hmm.
longer valid because it took too long for, the company to move forward with it. So this is exactly what you just said, uh, going through cycles. And I don't know if you read the book called Atomic Habits. Uh,
No, I
uh,
haven't.
it's it's a great book. It's for habits creation, and to avoid bad habits and to build good habits. And it gives you like this really actionable guide to do it. Of course, it's not rocket science, but it's not that easy to actually,
Doesn't have to be.
you know, build a habit, and continue with it. And basically, it says something like there are decisions that should be made in 30 seconds, others in 30 minutes, and others in 30 days, for example, right?
Hmm.
So
I
some
like that.
decisions,
Hmm.
and they give examples with that, right? So some people overcomplicate things, and 30-day decisions for something that must have, made in 30 seconds or minutes
Hmm.
doesn't make any sense. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. That all resonates. And it's obviously you have to be smart. So I love the framework. You still have to be smart about which ones fall into which one of those buckets, right? And so we've done that. And I would say that we've gotten it right all the time. But overall, following that general ethos has landed us to allow us to tweak and iterate, listen to customers. I think that's an important part of this is obviously we're looking at commercial metrics, revenue and sales and profit and et cetera. But the actual tangible and even if it's anecdotal but feedback from customers like
Yeah.
is something that I do very much and the team does as well. We're doing surveys, I'm doing calls with consumers, we have a community and I was listening, all right, and so we would test and iterate and try different things, and so that's helped us iterate and tweak things over time to land on this value proposition that really works.
Great. It's great that you do calls with clients. How often do you do them, more or less?
I would say it's not that often now. A lot of that happens more digitally, where I'm engaging with customers that do interact with us on social more often than I'm doing calls. I'd say that's more of a periodic thing where I actually set up calls with customers to do a quick Zoom or something like that. So that's more periodic. But I'd say what happens very often, both myself and the rest of my team are actually actively engaged in social media, and so directly connecting with customers who are putting in comments or asking questions or what have you. We obviously have a team to do that, but I actually jump in there myself and I do that pretty regularly.
That's amazing. I was asking because here we discussed that at length, with different, founders and marketing directors, etc., or even CEOs, right? That the importance of being, in permanent contact with the customers. Of course, it doesn't always need to be calls, as you said. Today we
Yeah,
have 1,000 ways to be in touch, but
yeah, of course.
some brands, what they even do is, some well-known brands, I won't mention them now, but they said it here in the pod, you know, they call them when they didn't buy in the last, I don't know, 90 days. They call them,
Mm,
it's not an intrusive call, but it's just, to see what happens, engage interest, and
huh,
understand if there's any insight for them or something that prevented them from buying that has to do with the product quality or whatever, the service quality.
interesting.
So yeah, that's pretty good. And then calling customers is very important. Of course, we cannot be doing everything every single day, but
Of
doing
course.
periodic calls with customers is really important. At least, where I wanted to ask you in this case, why do you decide to jump on them when you do it, and what do you look to get out of them?
You're saying when I talk to customers?
Yeah, why do you do it yourself, and what do you get out of
Yeah.
those calls?
Yeah, because there's nothing like the actual visceral reaction in the real world. Like when you are just looking at metrics, they matter. Like I'm obviously I come from a background of analytics and reporting, and I love numbers, right, and spreadsheets and so forth, and they matter a lot. But you can lose a lot between a spreadsheet and the actual experience that an individual has engaging with you in the real world, right? They're not thinking about you all the time, right? And so what is it that, was worked for them that gave them a spark, or frankly the opposite? Like when something goes wrong, what is it that's tangible that isn't just going to show up in the numbers? The numbers can kind of point to there's an issue here, but they can't tell you what it is, right? And I really think it is some of that verbatim that is necessary to really get the color of what's actually happening at the ground floor, and that's important to me. And so one of the things that I've learned that was a little bit inherent, like I did this when I first started, was this high level of engagement, kind of literally from the founder and CEO in the community, engaging, posting, talking, commenting. And one of the things I had heard, like another, I can't remember where I got this from, was, but especially in the early stages, is to do things that don't scale, right? I mean, a lot of times the advice is like everything you have to scale, and so you have to be thoughtful. And I think that that's well placed advice, but especially when you're trying to figure yourself out and figure out your value proposition, trying to find product market fit. I think it actually is really good advice, and I'm fortunate that I followed this one. Was to do things that don't scale, right? So to be in there and active, and to learn to iterate and hone in. And obviously, we have a bit more structure in place that can do a little bit more of it, so that I'm not carrying all that load. But I thought that was really helpful advice, and I learned a lot by knowing at a very detailed, visceral level what the customer experience was.
I love that advice. I first heard that from Jack Ma, Alibaba's founder,
Mm-hmm.
and we discussed that a few episodes ago with it's company that it's redefining the bag, let's say, for going to the gym, for going to, work, traveling. So it's like all-in-one bag. And
Hmm.
the founders, what they did back then, and they currently do it as well. They went, for example, to Central Park and some other locations with a sign saying, "Ask us about our bags." And the
Huh.
beauty of today's era that we are living in is that even the non-scalable things can scale through content.
Hmm. Through
So they recorded
Yeah, that's
themselves
actually true.
with non-scalable things. And the beauty of doing non-scalable things such as those is that, of course, they are not the only ways, but this is a way to get the like in-person reaction of your customers about
Hmm.
the product. So you give them the, let's say in this case, the bag, right? And they open it, they check the zippers, the size of the pockets. They don't say anything so far, but you can already see if they are checking for something, or the
Hmm.
faces, the expressions. And then of course you can chat with them and interact and ask them right there and listen to the questions they ask. Or do you have another model with bigger pockets? Or do you have like, you don't have
Uh-huh.
that online? Of course you have it, but in like in a reduced version, because not everyone who looks at something online leaves a comment or review or whatever. In this case,
Hmm.
you can interact with them, right? So that's the beauty of those efforts.
Agreed. Agreed.
Yeah. Now I wanted to ask you about profitability, because it was a word that was neglected for many years. And
Hmm. Hmm.
I'm not pointing fingers to anybody, because it's great to be in my position and point fingers at every company for neglecting that. But the truth is, most companies were comfortable with, with everything until they weren't, because of how things unfolded the last few years, right? So now everyone is like, okay, it's not only about talking, customer acquisition and top line revenue, it's about the bottom line profits. So
Hmm.
you are a venture funded, right? So first, I wanted you
That's
to
correct.
explain to everyone who is, listening and who's looking to be in that position as well, to say, what does it involve actually to be, venture funded? What are the ups, downs, or everything that entails in the day to day? And then you are profitable now, I believe, right? So why are you profitable
Just
now?
about. Yeah.
When was the first time you reached profitability, and how did you, I mean, was it always important for you? Again, it's 1,000 questions in one. Don't worry
I
if
got it though. I got it. Yeah, it's all good. I got it. I got it. So I'll talk first about being venture funded, right? And so that was one of the things that was important for me. And there's pros and cons to every pathway, right? For me, like as an executive, if I was going to jump into this, I was like, I want to do this at scale. And so having funding from the outset was fundamental for me to kind of leave this track and jump onto this entrepreneurial track. So I was a little bit unique in that I actually raised seed funding before I had a product. It was based on relationships and reputation, and a firm that sort of invested at the very earliest stages where there's a concept and there's some science behind it. A group called the Production Board was my original seed investor. So this was foundational for me to have that funding so that I could go out and do the research and build a team and build a brand, kind of even before we had revenue. And so I didn't come from deep pockets, and so it's not the kind of thing that I could have done just bootstrapped myself. I wanted to do it, and like I said, I wanted to build something that had potential to scale right away. And so that led me down this venture path, and that did kind of enable us to invest in the science, in the research, in the team, in the brand. And we raised a Series A from Alpha Edison and Acre Venture Partners as well. That allowed us to continue to invest and iterate, right? And so that definitely has given us potential and opportunity to invest and also to try things, and frankly to recover when things didn't work as well. So it's been absolutely foundational and fundamental. there obviously does come with there are trade-offs, right? I mean, when you have investors, that does kind of raise the bar, right, from a pressure standpoint to perform. You've communicated like this is what you expect to happen. The investors expect that to happen, and when it doesn't happen, you have to answer to them, right? And you have to figure things out, right? And so they're going to a good investor, which I've got good investors, are going to push you, like celebrate you when things are going well, see what else you can do, and then they're going to push you when things aren't going well, right? And what are you going to do about this? And what changes are you going to make, right? And so there's definitely, an area of oversight and expectations and pressure that do come, along with the capital, right, that you can get from venture investing. So there's multiple sides of it. Like I said, it was foundational for me and for what it is that we're doing and the way that we're trying to do it and the scale. Now, on the profitability front, I will say that like when we started the company in 2019 and when we launched in 2020, 21, profit wasn't something that was on our radar. And frankly, it wasn't on the radar for early stage venture backed companies, I would say in mass, right? If I could just paint with broad strokes, it was much more about like, do you have an idea, lean in and try to hit a home run, right? And so we were kind of following that path, even though I'd come up as a business executive. I was like, okay, I can try this, right? So let's hire ahead, like let's really invest in this. I know we believe and there's an opportunity there, but let's invest even before we fully proven out, call it this product market fit, that we're onto something. Times have changed, right? Over the past couple of years, where the markets have shriveled up, interest rates have gone up, VC investing has shrunk. That pendulum has swung significantly. Some might say a bit overly so, but now, break even and profitability are the new sexy terms, right, for early stage companies, and in and in the venture capital world, is that businesses are no longer just looking for a great idea or a great product with potential, but a great business that has proven that there's a fundamental need, and that it is actually a business that can be self-sustaining and has that, if not currently, at least a direct line of sight towards profitability. Now that's become somewhat of a table stakes, right, for many firms that are looking to invest in businesses in this day and age. And so, over this past couple of years, we've obviously have been watching where things have gone in the market, and that's caused us to really reorient ourselves with more of a bottom line orientation over the past couple of years. And I'll just answer the other question you asked before. Was it easy, like making this transition? The answer was absolutely not. It's literally one of the hardest things that we had to do. Was, we're on a pathway. We had invested and I built up the team, right, in preparation to scale before the business actually had scale. And we had to change that, right? And we had to get ourselves on a path towards break even and profitability and self-sustaining, right? Because you couldn't depend on the fact that there was going to be more venture capital there. As long as you continue to grow and lose money, you can just continue to raise. That pathway, I think, is largely gone. And so it's really businesses that have the concept and have growth potential, but that have a self-sustaining business. And so we had to get ourselves on that track, and that was literally everything that we did, from the products that we produce and kind of the margins that we can generate from the products, to everything that we spend money on, from operational expenses and obviously organization as well. And so it was hard going through all of those changes over the past couple of years. So we're a smaller team, right, than we were then. We're a bigger business than we were then, though, as well, right? So while difficult, it was absolutely the right thing to do, to put ourselves on the path towards, success, to be prepared to scale as a much more, efficient business. And that's enabled us, like, both our growth as well as getting fit, so to speak, and getting our costs in check, has allowed us to now be essentially a break-even business that has potential now to scale, profitably, depending on how we decide to invest, in the years to come.
It's amazing. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, definitely a bigger team or headcount doesn't mean a bigger business or better business. So definitely
For
many
sure.
brands have been doing the same thing, because it was something that, I'm not saying that many companies overhired, although many of them did. But even if
A lot
some
did.
companies didn't overhire, looking back with the information they had at the time, sometimes it was like, hey, what's the line between overhiring and delegating? Because sometimes it's like,
Yeah.
I can do $10 task or $100 task or probably 1,000 or bigger tasks. So if I'm doing this, probably I need to hire X, and you start doing
Mhm.
that. And with the information brands had back then, I don't think that was the wrong decision. with the right conditions and the right team members. But then it became almost impossible to continue growing profitably with such a company size. So
Yeah.
I don't know why this company I'm going to mention in a minute didn't do it this last year, but there's a beautiful e-commerce community called e-commerce fuel. They put together a report in 2022, in 2023 for 2022, but they didn't do it yet, at least this year for 2023. And it was a very, very comprehensive report. I have mentioned it a few times here in the pod, back then even more. And basically one of the things they included, they surveyed like thousand, seven and eight figure brands, and they
Hmm.
gathered data from tech partners as well. And basically in one of them, they were asking them about the challenges and some other things,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
about the company headcount according to the level of revenue. And I was
Mm.
surprised to see back then, because I didn't know what was the right headcount for a $9 million company or $80 million company. And I was surprised to see that probably up to 5 million, it was less than 10 people, or up to 10 million, it was
Mm.
12 people, or something like that on average, the survey the
Hmm.
companies have, right? And when I started interviewing companies like my Upbe or some other companies that are doing $80 million now, back then when they were doing 40 millions, when I had them on the pod a few years ago, they had 9 people. And it was like
Hmm.
$40 million company with 9 people. How the heck do you do that?
Wow.
And they build in
Wow.
public, for example, and they talk about that at length. So yeah, I was surprised. And then I started identifying the common patterns and say, no, this is true. Like what I read in that report, of course, I can validate that with every guest I bring on the pod, every client we work with at the agency, that they have a smaller team that I would have thought back then,
Hmm.
right? So
Yeah, it's actually been like, like I said, while it's been tough to go through the iteration from where we were to where we are, it very much has been incredibly necessary and informative to show what you can get done, right? With a smaller, tight group of dedicated, committed people that have, the right skill set, the right culture, the right attitude, and a sense of resiliency, as well, as sort of proven that we're at a point now where you know, the seams are about to burst, right? And so in order to scale, we obviously are going to have to build the team some now as well. But that's definitely something that is seared in me as we do scale, maintaining that hunger and fit mentality. And so, not sort of build it and they will come, but let's continue to maintain this identity and this culture as a resilient, kind of nimble team. And I think that's going to enable us to operate, frankly, faster than over hiring, and maintaining kind of good ratios in terms of productivity of, like, revenue per employee is something that I always want to maintain. We want to stay on the high end of that benchmark.
amazing. I wanted to talk about retail because you started, with the DTC channel, and then you entered into retail. Could you please talk about that? Why did you decide to do that? Was it, as you imagined before starting retail?
Mhm.
What were the main challenges, etc.?
Yeah, yeah. So it was always part of the business case, to build an omni-channel business, right? So at the outset, the aspiration was very large, right? In terms of how I think about things and the kind of impact that I want to have, and what gets me going. Like, I want to have a business that can help impact public health at large, right? I know those are big words, but I want to make it easier for people to feel better, right? And with functional foods that can do that. In order to do that, you have to have a sizable business, but you have to have products that are pretty broadly available. And so I always felt that even though I wanted to start direct to consumer, I always anticipated that an omni-channel approach was going to be the eventual pathway for the company. So we did start out direct to consumer, right? So our first 4 years were essentially only on our site on supergut.com, where we just had a very focused platform for people to come, learn about the brand, engage, and it was the only place for them to buy. And a lot of people bought and repeat purchase, a lot of subscribers as well. And we also maintain community. And so I love that as the outset, because you can, back to the conversation of staying close to the consumer, like, there's no path or channel that you can stay closer than when you're selling directly to an individual. I have to convince you Brian, right? That my brand is something that you should part with your precious earned dollars on, and you're going to engage with us, and might reach out on social or customer service, what have you. Like that's the best way to get that direct feedback mechanism is direct to consumer. So I think there's a lot of advantages of starting a business in DTC. Now that being said, DTC has gotten harder the past couple of years, right? It was years ago in the glory days, right? You could just put something out there and there was a lot of arbitrage and social media was new and you could buy ads and scale easily. Things have changed, right? You have, it's obviously more expensive on the social platforms. You had the Apple iOS a couple of years ago that changed sort of how efficiently you can do it. So DTC is a harder business than it was historically. That has helped sort of, I'd say, propel kind of our expansion that we'd always planned, but kind of just given how difficult it has gotten to grow in a profitable way, a DTC business has helped sort of, I'd say, somewhat accelerate our expansion as an omni-channel brand. And so the next stage for us was Amazon. So we launched on Amazon about a year ago. I had held out for a while. I had a lot of experience working on Amazon. I know it can be big, but I really wanted to control that customer experience as much as possible. But Amazon is just so massive, right? It's just the first place that most everybody goes. And the second that we open our Amazon store, we saw like the benefit of it, right? Because we're doing all of this work to create awareness and consideration, but we're forcing everybody to come to our site versus shopping where they naturally would shop online. And before we had paid a single dollar in advertising, we just turned on the store. Orders started to flow, right? We were like, okay, people are searching for us. It makes sense for us to be there. And so Amazon has been a nice growth channel for us. We anticipate continuing to grow Amazon at a pretty healthy clip going forward. The final stage, is retail. So again, it had always been on the plans for us to launch into physical retail, like grocery stores and whatnot. We started with the first one earlier this year. Given a product like ours, that's not an inexpensive, not too expensive, but it's a relative premium type product because the ingredients and the product quality is so high. It sort of made sense for us to start within the natural channel, which tends to be a little bit higher in, a lot in the West Coast here in Los Angeles, but spread out throughout the country, regional chains. So like Erewhon out here, Bristol Farms, Fresh Time in the Midwest, Central Market, in the Texas area, have been some of the initial retailers that we've launched at. But then, like things have accelerated, I'd say, faster than I anticipated as we broke into retail. And a lot of it has to do with the value proposition for our business and brand, like I described, because there's a lot of consumer interest and enthusiasm around our foundation, which is in gut health. But then you have the overwhelming amount of consumer interest in this whole GLP-1 world. And we're at the unique in that we're at the intersection of both. And when we have a value proposition that speaks to that gut healthy approach for appetite control, that's put us on the radar. And from a consumer and from a retailer standpoint as well. And so the next stage for us is we launched in the specialty like supplement channel. So we launched nationwide with both GNC and we recently launched with Vitamin Shop nationwide as well. Both of whom want to be a nutrition destination for people across their different health needs, but in particular those that are on sort of a weight loss or weight management journey. And then we have other big news coming up as well, which I can't quite share, but there's additional retail expansion on the horizon for Supergut as well to help bring sort of what we're doing into much larger market going forward. So yeah, things have definitely accelerated on the retail front for us.
Yeah, I can see that as a common pattern for many brands, that, are, let's say, qualified or it makes sense for them to sell in retail. And yeah, it's been a trend. DTCs harder. I mean, paid ads are, more expensive. I'm not saying they are less efficient. I would say that the the bar is definitely higher, and there's let's say many brands that are shining and succeeding there and many others that are not, and there aren't as many gray areas as before. It's not as
Yeah,
easy with $1 and get 2 or 4 or 10 out of it, right? So yeah, definitely.
yeah, no, that's true.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
with
and even some of the brands and even some of the brands that appear to be succeeding and are growing and high top line aren't necessarily succeeding when it comes to the bottom line, right? In terms of actually creating a profitable self-sustaining business. Even the brands that look like success on the outside aren't always a success all the way through from a fundamental business standpoint, which is at the end of the day, what I'm trying to create is, impact and creating a self-sustaining, large and scaled and valuable business. And that means you have to have profit at the end of the day.
Yeah, what we are trying to do with the clients, of course, it's not easy, it's not straightforward, and depends on the business model for each industry and company. In your case, for example, it makes sense for, or I would say, based on what think I know about your business, that it makes sense for your customers to rebuy, to subscribe and
Yeah.
buy. So it's a different scenario when it's a one-time purchase, because it's a
Yes, it
win,
is.
or it's either you win or lose. But in this case, and you can not only try to boost AOV, but you can actually try to decrease the time between purchases, try to get more purchases
Hmm. Improve
from them.
retention.
Yeah,
Hmm.
increasing the LTV as well. But we try to work on those levers, because in the end, some brands do need, to say, I have retail that's amazing, Amazon or any other marketplace that's amazing, but they are, most brands I speak with are heavy on Meta. If we talk about,
Yeah.
TikTok ads, Meta, the
Hmm.
number one.
Hmm.
I think it was a recent report from Kantar that said the same thing. No surprise, to people in this space at least. It's Meta, the number one channel. So it's about knowing whether you can be profitable with the first purchase, or otherwise knowing what your CAC payback period is as well, meaning when you're going to break
Yeah.
even with, right? So, and the CAC to LTV ratio and some other metrics that are important to say, okay, I'm not winning today or not being profitable today with this, but on average, if they buy in the next 30 days or so, so that's when we start tweaking things like, I don't know, uh, post purchase
Hmm.
follow, trying to educate them through campaigns, sometimes apps. Some brands have apps. There are some tech partners that help brands build an app without coding
Hmm.
or anything like that. Some other
Hmm.
brands have a custom app. But the point of the app is not to have a replica of the e-commerce, is to complement uh, the
Engage.
their, yeah, content education. So some supplement brands
Yeah.
for use it for recipes, for education on whatever's. Beauty brands use it
Yeah.
for routine, for having your hands hydrated or your skin, whatever, So those are the kind of experiences that, as a brand, as you said, that we all need to be omni-channel these days. So it's about
Mm,
like diversity without going crazy, but yeah.
I think so. I think so. Like, and there's no one size fits all, but I definitely would. I would posit that most brands should be thinking from an omnichannel standpoint these days.
Yeah, and it's because the number one reason for me, at least based on what I have heard, is, you know some different people buy in different places. I look for
Mhm.
things on Google, my wife on Instagram, some other people on Amazon, some other people on eBay, some other people on Reddit. So people are everywhere. So if you expand the
Mhm.
message, chances are that the message, the channel, the format, like some people love watching videos, some people hate it. Listening to
Yeah.
podcasts, some rather read a
Mhm.
newsletter, right? So it's a different thing. So the angle variety, touching different pain points, addressing different,
Yeah.
needs. So again, so everything is about diversity, channel, message, angles, formats, etc. So now I wanted to ask you about that exactly, because I wanted to talk about something that I think it's key for you guys, which is earned media. What
Mhm.
earned media, for people in the audience who are not aware of the term?
Yeah. So earned media is something that we've definitely focused on a lot more over the past couple of years. And it's essentially any form of publication or press or getting you as a leader or your brand out there where you're not actually paying for that placement. Right. And so examples are some podcasts, right? Like this, periodicals, newspaper, magazine interviews, can be television, can be press releases, can be listicles, kind of all these different forms of getting your brand out there where it's not paid advertising. It's not just pay for play. And it's great when it works. It's different than paid because you can't necessarily count on it, right? I mean, you have to be doing something that matters, right? And that is newsworthy and that others will find relevant, that not just you think is relevant, because obviously every entrepreneur thinks their stuff is the greatest thing in the world. It has to be relevant from a consumer standpoint. But when you can find that, that gives you an opportunity to engage, right? To try to get your brand out there. And when it works, it can be amazing, right? I mean, because given that you're not paying for it, your return on investment is amazing, right? It's just not as necessarily dependable and reliable on a day by day, month by month basis. But yeah, no, we've definitely shifted in orientation. We still, we're still have a large, sizable and growing DTC business, so we still do a fair amount on Meta and some other platforms as well. But we tried to shift some of the orientation to be a bit more balanced, sort of over time, and taking a more content based approach and trying to leverage earned media have been some of the elements as to how we've been trying to get our brand message out there and our awareness up through some of these other channels outside of paid social.
So, what channels are you most present on?
I would say Meta is our most present, and Instagram within Meta is where our core customer base lives. Is Instagram? Obviously, we're on Facebook as well. We do some on TikTok, but we tend to be a little bit older, than your typical TikTok. But we are there as well. We're just starting to dabble on YouTube. Obviously, Google we spend kind of a fair amount, and we're very much present there as well. So those are the social channels. But we have been quite active in some of the other avenues as well. And so we've been fortunate, especially given the unique positioning, or we've been gotten a fair amount of earned media as well. And so we've done work internally. We have got a great PR firm, so we've gotten featured the past whatever year in Wall Street Journal and New York Times and some industry publications like Food Navigator and Nosh and BevNet. And so kind of staying on top and out in front of key trends and in the news can help you get that earned media. And that exposure, it pays off, right? I mean, not always immediately right away. It's not direct response, but sometimes we do see a burst in orders when we get some earned media spots. But over time, it just builds brand awareness. The other thing we've done is a fair amount of podcasts as well. Which one of the things that we found is that since we do have a product and a value proposition that takes some consideration, it's helpful to have a bit more long form to be able to do a little bit more education, right? Even if you don't go deep into the science behind it, to be able to just connect the dots between Supergut is gut health, but it's also for appetite control and healthy blood sugar, right? To be able to talk about that a little bit more, and given that there's some real science behind it, we found podcasts to be another avenue. We found just an effective way to get our word out there.
What about collaborations with other brands or influencers? Have you done any of that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up. I should have mentioned that myself. It's something that we have tested with over time, and I would say it's really been more recently. Again, once we hone in on the value proposition, we figured ourselves out in a way that resonates. Now we are much more effective when we put it out there and we actually talk to creators and influencers to help spread the message. They are much more effective because we're providing them information to be able to resonate much more effectively with their audiences. And what we find is that when that works, they often do that better than we can ourselves, right? Because they are thinking and operating in a way that intrinsically resonates with their audience, right? That's how they have influence. And so we was like, this is our brand, this is our value proposition, these are products. And for those that for whom it resonates, they're like, okay, I got it. Now let me go tell this in my way. And when they do that, it really, really has proven to be very effective. So I fundamentally, we just really started. We test. It's kind of one of those test and learn, and then when you see a sign, which we have, then you lean in. So we're entering the lean in phase to work with more creators and influencers, and I'd say of all scales, right? I mean, so this, yes, we've worked with some larger and mid tier influencers, but this also includes more the smaller influencers as well, which might not be as much paid, more of a gifting, just engaging with the product to put out good content as well. So yeah, influencer is growing and increasingly, and I think in going forward is going to be an even larger portion of how we get the word out there and build awareness.
Yeah, now there's a totally new era, with social commerce. We have TikTok Shop. We have the partnership between, Google and Shopify, and not to mention what's not only, let's say, active, at least that I know of, but it's in the works between the partnership, like between Google and Netflix, for example, to show ads on these streaming platforms. And even in the future,
Mm.
why not being able to buy while you watch a TV show or a movie on these streaming platforms, buy what
Hmm.
the guy or the girl or whatever is wearing, or the couch you see,
Yeah.
or whatever. So we start in a totally new era. It has already started. It's here. It's a totally different thing, totally new opportunity for brands to leverage. And yeah, I'm super excited about that as well.
Very cool.
So I could stay talking forever because I feel that I have 1,000 more questions, but
Yeah.
we are almost out of time and I want to be respectful of your time. So last question I will ask, or I have two more, but this one is probably the last about the episode itself. If you were starting from scratch, what could you do differently for everyone in the audience who is about to do that?
Yeah, I would say there's two things. I'd say, and they're related. One is iterating and figuring out your value proposition, and really focusing in on that from the very outset, and testing and iterating before leaning in, right? Before investing significant dollars, do something on a small micro scale and test it in a million different ways to hone in on your value proposition and making sure it's one that resonates and that has real potential and it's solving a need for a consumer. So doing that early and figuring that out as soon as possible is an absolute unlock to building a healthy business. And on a related note, if one thing I would do differently, I wouldn't have invested as heavily until we had figured that out with a higher level of certainty, right? In terms of like the amount of infrastructure and the size of team, et cetera. So staying nimble as possible while you are figuring yourself out before you lean in are the two elements. Again, they're related, but those are things. Obviously, hindsight's 2020, right? And thankfully, I survived kind of the challenging period and figured it out now. But yeah, looking back, I think we would have saved a number of years and a fair amount of capital if we had followed a bit more of those approaches at the outset. But that's the entrepreneurial experience. So it's a lot of lived experiences. But yeah, hopefully some others can take some of these lessons to avoid some of the pitfalls that I ran into in the first couple of years.
Amazing. To wrap up, is there anyone you would like to give a shout out to? Someone that has helped you in your career, mentor, former boss, anyone?
Yeah, well, frankly, I'm going to give a shout out to my team because this team is unbelievably resilient. The fact that we have currently 9 full-time employees that is doing a lot and building this rocket ship that have been with me through the ups and the downs of this business. And I obviously could not do this without them. And we have a really strong culture and a really strong sense of resiliency. And this is a team that I can't wait to scale this business with. So yeah, if I'm going to give a shout out to, it's definitely the people that are on this boat with me rowing on this crazy journey that we call Supergut.
Amazing. Shout out to them then. Okay, great. So, Mark, this was amazing. Um, the last question I have for you is where can people go to learn more about you and Supergut?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So easiest is online. So our site is probably the best place, supergut.com. And obviously you can shop, but there's a lot more information for those who are curious about whole gut health and this whole GLP-1 world. Like we've got a lot of helpful information there, blog and articles and et cetera about, the science behind what it is that we're doing in addition to being able to shop. You can also find us on Amazon on the Supergut store and our full product lines available, or you can shop in one of your local retailers. I mentioned a couple of the names and more coming soon. We actually on our site you can see we have a store locator. You can see where we're carried physically. And then obviously on social as well. We're pretty active, and I think it's a pretty fun and engaging channel. I'd say we're most active on Instagram and Facebook. We're also on TikTok as well. So just at Supergut.
Amazing. So if you're listening to this or why not watching this, if you go to the DTCinsider.com and click on the episode name, you will find all the show notes and then you will find, of course, the social handles, website, and everything Mark mentioned. Mark, it was a pleasure to have you here. Thanks for being on the pod.
Absolutely. Really enjoyed the conversation, Brian. Thanks so much.